Hi guys, it's Jess and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if it is your first time here. For today's video I am going to be sharing with you the books that I read in the month of April. So as with March, I had an incredible reading month in April. I just managed to get so many things read. I didn't manage to read everything on my TBR, but you can't have everything, can you? So let's just jump straight in with the first book I read, which was Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. This is a book which probably needs very little introduction because it seems to have blown up everywhere. On Bookstagram and on Booktube itself, people just seem to be falling in love with this book. So when I went into it, I tried not to have too high hopes for what it was going to be like, and overall I really enjoyed this book. We basically follow the story of Eleanor, who is a woman in her early 30s who just has the same kind of life. Every day she goes to work, she wears the same kind of outfits, she eats the same kind of food. She's very much a creature of habit and routine, and as we jump into her story we begin to see that that is perhaps because there is some level of trauma in her past, and Eleanor has basically chosen to bury this trauma. She doesn't think about it. She tries to have as little to do with her past as possible, excluding a phone call from her mum which happens every single Wednesday. And part of this story is Eleanor's journey to finding out who she really is and dealing with her past and making important social connections, which she finds that she has been lacking in her life. And for the most part I really enjoyed this book. As I said, the writing style of this is a little bit on the quirky side. It took me a little while to get into it. I found it quite jarring almost to begin with until I got into the flow and kind of just got to grips with the way that the author had decided to write the story. And no spoilers, but I will also say that as much as I loved Eleanor, I loved the character of Eleanor, I loved her development, I loved the side characters, in particular Raymond and Sammy. I thought that they were really good. I wasn't overly enamoured with the ending of this book. There was one element of it, and if you've read it I'm sure you will know what I'm talking about, but if you haven't read it I don't want to spoil it, but it just was a little bit overdone and unnecessary to Eleanor's character development, I think, and I felt like it just didn't sit well with the rest of the story and with the rest of the journey that Eleanor had gone on, and so it lost a little bit of its rating for me from this one point. But overall I thought that it was a very heartwarming and touching story. I loved the way that the author dealt with the issue of loneliness and how small acts of kindness towards people that we meet in our everyday life could have a much bigger impact than we even really know that we're having. And yeah, overall I really enjoyed it, apart from that one tiny thing which, had that not existed, probably would have made this book a 5-star rating for me, but good nonetheless. Next up we have Caravel by Stephanie Garber, and I read this as a buddy read with Krista from Books and Jams. And if you watched my latest reading vlog, if you didn't I will link it in the description box down below so you can go over and watch it afterwards. You'll know my feelings about this book, because the only way that I can think of to describe this book is it's an absolute roller coaster ride. It had me up and down and left and right and guessing and being sure and then not having a clue. It was just such a fun experience, and it was such a fun reading experience to buddy read this with Krista as well, because we were both bouncing ideas off each other. And I know the criticisms about this book, and I can see where the criticisms come in, and I think a large part of my enjoyment level of the book was that I buddy read it with Krista and we were just able to chat about it and say what we thought was going on, and neither of us actually proved to be right. So that tells you that this book is not as straightforward as you might think. So essentially this is a book about two young girls who live with a very domineering father, and the eldest daughter, her dream is to go to an event called Caravel, which is kind of this mystical, immersive circus experience, but only a very few people get invited to it. And then one year she's invited, she goes along, and things are just not quite what they seem. Her younger sister is taken, and the point of the Caravel, the point of the circus, is that they have to try and find her sister. And I'm not going to say much more than that. One of the things that I really liked about this book is that we're told several times right at the beginning, and I want to say it because this is a major criticism of the book. It says it on the front cover, remember it's only a game. We're told several times in the beginning that you can't believe everything that happens in Caravel. All the way through there's kind of this, you think something's going one way and then it's revealed to you that it's not real. But that is kind of the whole purpose of the story. It's not a get out free card for the author where she's written herself into a corner and she doesn't know how to fix it. The whole point of the book is that you're reading an unreliable narration of what's going on, and that's the fun of the book, is that you're trying to work out what part is real and what part isn't real, and you don't know, and it's just so much fun to try and guess. And I really enjoyed it. I thought that the author was really upfront about that element, so I can't quite understand how people feel duped about it. I mentioned this when I was talking to Krista, but I read a book last year or the year before called We Were Liars by E. Lockhart, and that has an unreliable narration, but you don't know that till the end. And when I got to the end, I felt completely duped because I'd believed something all along, and then it transpired to be something entirely different, and you had no idea and you didn't see it coming, and I did not enjoy that. Whereas I really enjoyed knowing up front that perhaps not everything that I was reading was 100% true and was 100% accurate, and I loved trying to work out which parts were real and which parts weren't. I just thought it was a really fun reading experience, and I would highly recommend it. And the second one, I think, called Legendary, comes out either this month or next month, and I just can't wait to read it. I just think if it's anything as fun and exciting as this one, then it's just going to be so good. Next up we have The Enchanted by Renee Denfeld, and this is a magical realism story which just hit me in the feels. I didn't really know what to expect going in. It's not that clear on the back, it's not that clear on Goodreads really, unless you want to read spoilers, exactly what this book is about. And so going in, as I started to read it and as I started to discover what the story was about, I just wasn't prepared for the feelings that I would ultimately feel. So essentially this is a book about a man on death row. It has a variety of characters. As I said, there is a lot of magical realism in that we're told the story from the perspective of this man on death row, but he seems to be able to see all throughout the prison. He seems to be able to see into the lives of a number of external characters, including a death row prosecutor, a priest, and the prison warden, I guess the guy who's in charge of the whole prison. There's lots of different references to things which don't really make much sense but have sense to him, such as little men tapping away in the walls, which obviously translate to, I don't know, pipes or just sounds elsewhere in the prison. You know, there are golden horses that run underneath the prison and all these kind of things. But it's just such a moving book, and ultimately it's about what makes people monsters. So we look a little bit at the history of one of the prisoners on death row. The death penalty investigator kind of takes his case on and goes off and investigates his past, and you begin to realise that he's had this awful hand of cards dealt to him, and was it inevitable that he himself would become a monster when he's had such an awful experience of childhood? And so it doesn't really answer the questions, but it throws them up and really makes you think about it. And it's not an examination of whether the death penalty is the right thing or the wrong thing. It's none of those things. It really is just a question mark, I guess, behind what makes someone make the choices that they make, what makes someone a monster, what makes them a murderer, etc, etc. And it was funny because I couldn't help but fall in love with this main character, even knowing that he was on death row for something horrendous, and you never really know what it is that he's done, although I did guess who he was before the end of the book. But you still can't help but have a little bit of emotion for him, and you feel sorry for him. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. I just didn't know what to expect going in, and so many people had said to me that it was a really good book, and it really is. So if it sounds like something you'd be interested in reading, then I'd highly recommend it, because it was an unexpected fantastic read for me. Then another book which needs very little introduction, I read The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. This is a book about a teenage girl called Star, who basically has to try and live two separate lives. So her family live in a very poor part of the city, but her parents are paying for her to go to a school in a much more affluent part of the city, where she is one of only 2 people of colour who go to that school. Everybody else is predominantly white, middle class or upper class wealthy people. And so she finds herself in this position where she's being 2 different people in her life, and she's trying to traverse this as a teenager. And then one day she is coming home from a party with her friend. They're pulled over by the police. Her friend is shot and killed, and this whole series of events starts to unravel for Star, where she has to learn to speak up for who she is. She has to find out who she is. She has to decide who she is and find her voice and speak out about the things that she's seeing that she thinks are just so grossly unfair. And I found this a really moving story. I know it's had huge acclaim, and pretty much everybody who has read it has loved it, and I am exactly the same. It's not the type of book that I have picked up before. It gave me an insight into people's lives that you kind of, you know about it in an abstract way, and obviously I could never know about it because I've never had to live it. I've never had to experience something like that. But it was just a real insight into other people's lives and people who walk in different strokes of life. And I really appreciated the honest and impactful way that it did that, if that makes sense. So yeah, another one that I just thought was stunning, a real classic read for me, and I'm really pleased that I picked it up. Then we have maybe my favourite read of the month, and again this was a buddy read that I did, this time with Julie from A Girl and a Book, and that was Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. This was my first experience of Laini Taylor's writing, and honestly, one of the things I think I've said about pretty much every book that I picked up this month is that going in I had different expectations to what I found, but for the most part they were really pleasant surprises when it turned out to be slightly different. And I would definitely say that for Laini Taylor's writing, because I'm fairly confident that this is classed as a YA book, but it didn't read like your typical YA fantasy book. And I'm comparing her writing to the likes of Sarah J Maas and even Leigh Bardugo, who you know is my girl and I love her writing. This just didn't, it was almost a level up in its intricacy and its detail and its narrative, but it just gave it an elegance that I think sometimes YA fantasy books are lacking a little bit. But I absolutely loved it. Basically, this is the story of our protagonist, Laszlo Strange, who is an orphan. He's grown up in a monastery. Then he gets the opportunity to go to the city and work in a library, and he immerses himself in all these magical books and tries to uncover everything he can about this city called Weep, which is a city that has been lost but for some reason has impacted Laszlo, and he can't stop thinking about it, and he's desperate to go. And then one day he gets the opportunity when a group of people come from the city of Weep and collect together academics and scientists and say that they need a group of delegates to come with them to the city of Weep. And I am not going to say much more than that, because ultimately I just loved discovering all the different intricate parts of this story. I didn't know very much going in, and that was the best way to read it because it just made it so much fun. And there is a character in this book who absolutely broke my heart, and every time they were featured I just loved it. I just lapped it up. I thought it was fantastic. But I didn't know about this character going in, and I really think that that is the best way to go into this book. again, it was a book which hit me in the feels. I just thought that it was so good, and I am 100% going to be picking up the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy by Laini Taylor, because if it even comes close to this book, then I know that I am absolutely going to adore it. I just thought that this was so good. I got completely taken up in the world. I got completely lost in it. She had this way of just transporting you. There's not a whole load of world building that goes on, and yet you can picture exactly where you are. And as with most books, you know, it wasn't without its flaws. I thought that it was quite slow to begin with, and Laszlo's character never really took off for me. I found his character development quite abrupt, and he goes from being quite meek and mild to suddenly not being so meek and mild, and that didn't quite gel for me. The two different sides of his personality and his personal growth didn't quite go as fluidly for me, but there were other characters in this book that I just completely fell for and loved, and I cannot wait for the next one. And then I'm just going to mention this book very briefly because I'm kind of filming this early, and I'm definitely going to finish this by the end of April, and that is Nevermore, The Trials of Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend. This is a middle grade book which I had planned to read for middle grade March and just didn't quite get round to it, and I am so glad that I picked this up. I'm actually buddy reading this with one of my subscribers called Chrissy, and again, I'm loving it. I'm loving doing my buddy reads this month because it's just so much fun to chat about your reading experience as you go along. So I'm not going to say too much about this because I'll talk about it more in my May wrap up, but this is a middle grade fantasy book, and honestly I am just in love. Every time I read this I wish I could fall into the world that Jessica Townsend has created and just experience it for a day, because it's just so magical and whimsical and everything that a middle grade book should be. And I know that last month I read The Girl Who Drank the Moon and I said that that was fantastic, and this is the same but in kind of different ways. I think where The Girl Who Drank the Moon was, maybe I wouldn't say that this one was whimsical. I would say that The Girl Who Drank the Moon was full of whimsy and magic, and this one is full of kind of coming of age type magic and gives me a little bit of Harry Potter vibes, just not in terms of the storyline or what happens, but just in terms of the way that it makes you feel when you're reading it, if that makes sense. But yeah, another one that I'm sure is going to be a 4 or 5 star read, and I'm really excited to get to the end of it. So there you go, they're the books that I read in the month of April. Do let me know what you read in the last month and what you're reading now. I always love to know. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to give me the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more content, and as always I will see you soon.